perfect. So, thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name's David Ford, Director of Client Relations here at Business-Wise Solutions. So I'm going to give you a 10-minute whistle-stop tour of the energy markets. So just jumping off from some of the things that James said and some of the things that some of the other speakers have said, but just going into a little bit more depth. Some of the challenges that has for the hospitality sector, but also some of the opportunities going forward. So I'll also occasionally, because I do have opinions, jump in and do my whole Martin Lewis thing, offering a bit of consumer advice for you guys as well. Here we go. So if we're just starting off, so this is a familiar graph that you will have seen once before. This is energy prices over the last 3 years. As you can see, we've been on a pretty crazy ride over the last 18 months, since actually before the war in Ukraine started. This has been coming for some time. It isn't just the end of COVID. It's a whole variety of factors, but it was really kick-started by that beginning of that conflict in February of last year. This is me in August of last year, right at the top of that spike. So that was around about 500 to 600 pounds per megawatt hour, which in real world is your domestic household bill being 4 times what it usually is. So instead of paying £1,000 a year, you're paying £4,000 a year. Obviously, most people can't afford that, and that's why we've had a series of government interventions in the market. Interestingly, hospitality has been one of those industries which has had the least amount of assistance. Generally, it's been for bigger users, but and where we are here, right at the end, is where we are right now. So even though to some degree the crisis has abated, we're still with energy prices that are 2 to 3 times where they normally are. So why has all of this happened? Well, it's happened because we only get a trickle of gas from Russia. Russia was the cheapest source of all of our gas. If you take gas out of Siberia, stick it in a pipe and send it to Europe, that's a very cheap way of supplying gas. Unfortunately, we only get around 5% of that now, ironically through Ukraine. So instead, we have to get that gas from somewhere else. And we're getting it mainly from the United States and a little bit more from Norway. So that in itself has, that in itself has lots of risks. So for example, okay, you're no longer reliant on this man over here, but instead you're reliant on the President of the United States, which in 2 years' time may well not be Joe Biden anymore. Could be someone else, and they could cause enormous problems, at least for European energy security. So things look like they're getting better, but there are substantial risks. If you were to ask me, I think right now is a pretty good price going forward, especially when you consider that actually going forward things are looking pretty rosy. So partially thanks to these two men, but also thanks to other people before, Ed Davey, for example, we have started to exploit the incredible resource of the North Sea. So the North Sea is absolutely perfect for offshore wind. You don't have to float these wind farms. You can just drill down straight into the seabed and stick these things up. Around about 18 months it takes to commission an enormous offshore wind farm, and I think it's something that Boris Johnson said that by 2040 he believes that we could be the Saudi Arabia of wind. And if you look at this graph, which is from National Grid, which is a relatively credible source, perhaps unlike Boris Johnson, that looks likely to happen. So if you fill up the North Sea with offshore wind, all of a sudden, instead of being a net importer, we're a net exporter, which should be very, very good for electricity prices in this country. You've got the wind, of course, is free. You don't have to pay for it, unlike gas. And you've got enormous amounts of green certificates, which should mean that hotels and other sectors should quite easily be able to deal with their scope 2 emissions, which is good. Those other two emission scopes, so scope 1, which is mainly gas burning in hotels, and scope 3, transport and everything else, that will have to be dealt with. So if we move on to those, what does that mean in reality? So we've heard quite a bit about investment, capital. Well, what is that in terms of boots on the ground? Well, it's two things really. It's EV charging points, and it is air source, and in a few minority cases, ground source heat pumps. These look great on paper, but they are quite expensive to install. And in terms of the works that needs to take place, not just on the asset level, but nationally, it will require an incredible amount of work and investment to make this happen. Just to give you a small example, I got an electric car 3 weeks ago, and I had the charging points installed. It took them 2 weeks to dig everything out, take the cable out of the ground, which I originally had, and put in a new cable. The cable went from a diameter of this sort of size to that sort of size. So if you imagine that needs to happen in 50% of all driveways, car parks, by the side of the road, that's an incredible amount of aluminium and copper, and it's an incredibly expensive undertaking, which we all have to appreciate. Heat pumps have their own issues, mainly around needing to insulate homes and businesses in order to get them to work properly. So this may finally encourage government and others to start investing in insulation, because they don't work without them. So we've got this enormous infrastructure requirement, enormous spending requirement needed by all parties. Currently, if you're focusing specifically on the capacity and the charging issue, if you look at West London, so we've got a map there from Fulham all the way out to West London and into Berkshire, there is no spare capacity. So even if you wanted to, install a new hotel or something, you would have to pay for the improvements to the electricity infrastructure yourself. You can't just connect up. So even now, without this enormous investment, there is no capacity requirement. And that's why there have been some few technical changes to charging over the past few years. Capacity-related charges have increased by 10 times. So if you look at your bills, you may have seen things move from your unit rate into your standing charge, and that's because of this exact problem. You can blame data centers for that, because in West London it is mainly data centers. But if anybody's had an EV charger installed at their businesses, they'll know just how expensive it is to dig a trench. What are some of the solutions? Well, if you can't get capacity or the grid won't pay for it, there are a few things you can do. So there have been some members of your sector who, instead of building the capacity, building new transformers, instead get a load of batteries, stick it on their roof, charge it up overnight, and use that during the day. Great idea, and it actually works fairly well. Your peak demand is usually for a very short time of the day, so batteries can often cover that. So that's a good road that people are looking at. So, in conclusion, where have we come from and where are we going to? Well, we've been in a world where electricity and gas is very, very expensive. That world should come to an end in the medium term with this investment in onshore wind. Going forward, the big issue and the big question would be who holds the capacity, who has the cables going to their premises and their businesses. That means that they can be the ones to take advantage of the transition that we're going on. If the people act now to secure that capacity, they're going to be the ones in the driver's seat in 4, 5, 6 years' time, when everybody else is forced by regulation to get hold of this capacity. So, last piece of consumer advice: if I were you, check it out, have a look. Do you have the right capacity for EV charging points? Do you have the right capacity for your heat pump? And if you don't, try and secure it now. And that's it.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, David.